answer the question, you know, why do you love history? I'm a historian, and so I have no real way of figuring out how to answer that question except for to think about my own history. And so I think that a lot of times we start loving things before we realize that we love them. And I think that's how God made us. And so I didn't become a history major until college, but I think I started loving history long, long before that. When I was young, I think this may be my earliest memory of loving history. My family had a book of World Book encyclopedias, but they also had a children's component to that called Childcraft. And the Childcraft was divided into a number of different topics, but I remember there was one called, well, there were several of them, but one was called People to Know. And it was full of all these little tiny mini biographies, about 4 pages long, of all sorts of people in history. And I read through those actually several times and read, you know, little biographies about, you know, Leonardo da Vinci and Homer and Babe Ruth and Helen Keller and all kinds of people. And so at some age, I started reading those things, and it was just really fascinating to me to read about these people in different times and different places. So I think that's where I started to love history, and before I even realized it, what was happening in me was that I was starting to develop a deeper understanding of the world. And ever since then, like I said, it's hard for me to understand the world unless I go to some history. So let me further expound on this by giving you a little story that fits into a theme. The story itself won't surprise you. Story's about a history major I had a number of years ago, and she was in Starbucks studying history, just sitting at the table with their coffee. These 2 boys came up, they're about 10 years old, and they started talking with her, you know, college student. Ooh, hey, what you doing? Oh, so, you go to college? Yeah. Ooh, wow, you know, she's studying? Oh, yeah, what do you study? You know, like, why are you doing that? You know, what are you studying? History. She says, why are you doing that? She said, well, I'm a history major. And one 10-year-old boy says, can you make a lot of money with that? Now, the story doesn't surprise you, but I want you to think about that for a moment. Here is a 10-year-old boy, you know, not very old, but already has this conception, college, major, can you make a lot of money with that? Where did he pick that up? It's in the air, it's in our culture, it's in our society that even 10-year-olds, maybe earlier than that, are having this association. You go to college, you get a job so you can make a lot of money. And this runs very, very deep. And so there's a problem here. There's a problem here because we all have this sense that isn't there more to life than this? I was thinking about a friend of my daughter's. My daughter's explaining one day they're sitting around the high school lunch table saying, go off to class again. Why are we here? Well, we're here so we can finish high school. Why are we finish high school? So we can go to college. Why are we going to college? So we can get a job. Why do we get a job? So we make a lot of money. It wasn't exciting at all. She felt burdened by this. She felt sort of enslaved by this. And so, to illustrate this, I would say it's like this. Some of you, maybe more of you, know the film The Matrix. If you were a college student 13 years ago, you all would have seen The Matrix, but the basic story of The Matrix is this Keanu Reeves character has this sense that the world is maybe not what it seems to be, and through a series of events, he runs into the Samuel Jackson character and discovers, entry takes the pill, that the world is not what it seems. That actually, everybody's been walking around with this consciousness that the world was operating a certain way, but the reality is that they're all tied into these machines that have taken over the world, that are sucking their life blood out of them. But to keep the people docile, they make them think that they're in this dream world that they are not. They are, in essence, slave to this matrix. I would say this. We are slaves in our society to this idea that college is about getting a job. And the person who enslaved us was Andrew Carnegie. Well, that's not exactly true, but let me back up one step. The question is, you know, for Keanu Reeves, once he understands that, you know, you've got to fight this, that once you see what's going on, you've got to fight this somehow. So if we're actually enslaved in our society in some way to this idea that this is what college and life is all about, how do we get out? How do we get out of the matrix? History. That's the solution. That's the pill. Actually, it's not just history. I have to say, it's all these other topics. It's all these other disciplines as well. You know, arts and science, math, and all these other sorts of things. It starts to open up your world. You realize, I don't have to be tied to this. I can live a much fuller life. Because what a lot of these topics do, and what history does, is help us understand the world much, much more deeply. We understand the world much more deeply. We can live a deeper and fuller life. And we can also help address sort of these things that bog us down and enslave us. Like, why do 10-year-olds think that college is just about getting a job? History. Let's turn to that. It'll help us explain this. Now I'll go back to Andrew Carnegie. Before I get to Andrew Carnegie, here's 150 years ago. Almost all colleges and universities in the United States were Christian colleges and universities, and they had a particular purpose. The purpose was to produce certain kinds of people. People who were Christian, people who loved God, who wanted to use their lives in ways that glorified God. That was the purpose of the vast majority of colleges in this thing. Through a number of changes that took place and were going on, one stream was intellectual changes that were going on, which that stream I won't get into right now, but there's another stream that was going on, and that was industrialization was massively changing the economy. This is where Andrew Carnegie comes in. Andrew Carnegie, very, very wealthy, probably the wealthiest man in the United States by about 1900, owned steel mills. He's basically the founder of U.S. Steel. Was very interested in education. He himself did not have a college education. He himself did not have a liberal arts education. He could have used it. Because what he thought higher education should be about was turning out accountants, chemical engineers, businessmen, lawyers. Why? For the economy. To make a prosperous economy. Now, I should say, I'm in favor of accountants, lawyers, chemical engineers, but not so narrowly trained that that is the only thing that you are. But that is what Andrew Carnegie thought that college education should be about. Now, he's not the only one. I just use Carnegie as an example. There were plenty of people who thought that. And so the purposes of college education started to shift. Away from developing people who would, be great people who use their gifts to glorify God, to we need to churn out people who can be successful businessmen and have these economic sort of goals in society. Carnegie helped pave the way because he donated millions of dollars to colleges if they would abandon their Christian mission. That was one of the conditions. And shape their higher education goals towards these things that he wanted, to very specific, practical sort of jobs. And hired a man actually to oversee a fund. The man was a Methodist preacher's kid. Gotta watch out for those guys. Who had actually moved away from the faith and was also convinced that in the modern world, we've abandoned religion. We need to move towards this brave new world where we are turning out people for the economy. That is where the Matrix came from. But I should also point out one other thing about that. There was a secularization dynamic in that as well, as you can see. If life is just about getting a job, then where does God fit into this? And a lot of us, even Christians, get caught in this. We don't even realize. Christianity is over here, and then I can be maybe a good Christian as an accountant, but I miss out on the fullness of an education that could, in this opportunity where God could actually produce in me a deep understanding of the world that would help me not only at work, but at home and as a citizen in church and in my neighborhood and in my community. And that's what all the liberal arts are really about. And there is a deep Christian dynamic to those things. If we study history, we can find that out. But it's okay to study other things too. By the way, junior colloquium people, Mark Knoll, historian. Yeah. Dr. Nicolette talked about history. Yeah. Alexis, art history. Yeah. If Dr. Calder had had more time, math history. He would have done it. All right. applause.